listening to Driving Law, a podcast by Kyla about all things related to the rules of the road.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Driving Law. I am Kyla at Acumen Law, and with me, actually in person for a change, is my co-host, Paul Doroshenko.
You can maybe see the top of the big microphone there, and then you can tip it down. And behind us, we have a very David Lynch-like Twin Peaks red curtain.
Yeah, well,
Make it interesting.
I don't know that anything we're talking about today could even be remotely related to Twin Peaks.
I think this situation with the police in Toronto could be.
Are you kidding? Dale would never.
Dale would never, but surreal police behavior, I think.
Yeah, so if you've been living under a rock in Canada, one of the biggest police scandals of probably all time has been exposed in Toronto. You may have recalled many months ago, maybe a year and a half ago now, there was a lot of carjackings that were taking place in Toronto, and the Toronto police were recommending that people don't do anything about it. Just, leave your car keys by your front door.
Better to let your car be stolen than get into a fight.
Well, turns out, and we don't know whether the officers who gave this advice are involved yet, but turns out there are 9 Toronto police officers who have been arrested and are being charged with offenses for unlawfully accessing police databases, working with criminal organizations to provide information to those criminal organizations, and participating in a murder plot against a corrections officer.
So, wow. And of course, my first thought is I think about other police scandals. Police scandals during my career. The one that always sticks out in my mind is the Vancouver police officer who was running
the sex ring?
A drug trade, maybe sex ring. He had 2 girlfriends he was trying to pay. He was threatening people and making them sell drugs. He was stealing drugs from people and then using that to sell. And he was investigated and charged. When I first started practicing as a lawyer, the Vancouver police used to take people down to Stanley Park that they'd pick up on the street and beat the hell out of them. And this was a long-standing practice that had gone on for a long time. And then one officer who they were trying to initiate into this was a whistleblower, and that ruined his career, not the rest of everybody else's career who knew about this or practiced it. And then we had these police officers with their horrible text exchange that we had out in Coquitlam.
The racist
one
problem.
of them's been just fired. One of them's been was ordered to quit or stand to be fired. And then the third one, it's still happening. And, it is just shocking to me. But then Toronto comes along and, so we've had in Toronto a tow truck gang war. Where
that was going to be our topic this week.
Well, I mean, this is just an ongoing thing in Toronto, the tow truck gang war. It was going to be our topic a bunch of times, and we ended up in not doing it. But tow truck gang war, where there's been shootings between tow trucks, and the police are involved in the towing issue, and it's who's ordering the tow trucks. And so, now we have this. So
yeah, we have this. Yeah. So this is a big investigation. They got other police forces involved, obviously. It was York Police that conducted the investigation. But a lot of people in the Toronto police were aware of it. I think there were over 250 officers involved in the conducting of the investigation.
Yeah, I don't know how you keep it secret from the people you're investigating. And I don't know how you approach officers and say, we need you to investigate this without concerns that maybe that person's going to be a leaker to somebody else. But
yep. And among the police officers is a father-son duo. So the father is retired. He just recently retired. And they're actually a legacy Toronto police family. When the son got what do you get called to had appointed a police? I don't know, whatever it is. When he graduated the academy,
has their ceremony and
had
their badge.
They had the dad who was still working there, and then the grandfather who was attending, and there was a whole news story on them. Anyway, turns out these two people, John Madley Jr. and Sr., were maybe maybe not so good.
Yes. You will note on that list that they are all men.
Mm-hmm.
And I note your Weird and Wacky Wednesdays this week was all male police officers doing creepy things.
So weird that we almost never hear about female police officers that get involved in things like this.
Yeah. And I, don't operate under the assumption that all women are ethical. Some women are horrible and some are psychos and some are Ghislaine Maxwells, and this does happen. But for every Ghislaine Maxwell, there's like 10 men. So, like, look at the file. So it's all men except Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah. So this is not just an investigation involving the police. There's also, big underworld drug trafficking and car stealing and murdery people. One person named Brian DaCosta, who was involved allegedly in a very sophisticated drug trafficking operation with cannabis and fentanyl. And he was arrested by some of these police officers. He had 169 pounds of cannabis and a pound of fentanyl. It could kill a lot of people. They apparently were thinking they were going to be sending it to Europe. And this guy was arrested by 4 of the officers who were involved in this. They basically, the theory is that he bribed them. And that's kind of how this started.
There's a book I read in university. Chinua Achebe wrote Things Fall Apart. That's the famous one. But then they published 3 of his books together in a trilogy. And one of them was, I knew the name a second ago and it's past me, but it was dealt with civil servants being compromised. A civil servant gets compromised. He does something that seems innocuous at first. And it's basically a small grift. But then after that, he's like, the moment you do it, you open yourself up to somebody extorting you.
Yeah.
I used to tell all the junior lawyers or the articled students, when I would tell them, never do anything that empowers someone to extort from you. Like, lawyers have gotten in trouble in the past, and I've known of circumstances, not anybody contemporaries, but they were taking cash.
Just to be clear, not this person here.
Taking cash money, just cash money as payment. And then what do? They just empower that person to extort them. And the moment a police officer steps over the line in one of those circumstances, something that seems innocuous, seems small, seems like a little step.
Yep.
You're in as deep as you can get. You've got both feet in the bucket.
You take the bribe to let the guy go, and now the guy's got that on you forever.
Yeah.
And forever you're going to be basically at their mercy.
And if he's picked up in anything else, he's going to tell them to try and cut a better deal.
So what does this have to do with driving law? You might be thinking. I mean, obviously there's the connection to the car theft, but it wasn't just that. It was the amount of access that police have, and unrestricted, unmonitored access to people's data. Police can run anybody's driver's license information. They can search your name, then find your driver's license information, which gives them your address. It gives them your insurance information, gives them your phone number, your email address, because you provide those to the insurer. You get so much information on people, even their associates, which is contained in insurance databases. And one of these officers was using driver's license databases to look up people's information. And they also were stealing driver's licenses that the police would seize in investigations, stealing them to be able to access their personal information.
This is considered a huge violation. I remember talking with Grant Gaucatreau about it because he knew of police officers who had gotten in huge trouble for inappropriately accessing computer systems. Of course, we saw Lawrence Lecker a long, long time ago for a very good reason, I thought, access a computer system, and he got in big trouble for it. It is here you can see why those restrictions exist, is to stop this. And you can also see how vulnerable it is to bad cops. And that the entire system, our whole system, I keep thinking of the rule of law. You've been talking about the rule of law in your TikToks, and I keep thinking about the rule of law as it seems to be falling apart in the States. When there's no consequences, there's no rule of law. When there is, and in the States, sorry, my computer just, hopefully it's still recording.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
When there's no consequences, there's no rule of law. In the States, we see the U.S. government disregarding the law. When there's a court order, they're the ones who are supposed to enforce the order, and they don't necessarily follow the law. Here in BC, it strikes me regularly as I deal with the IRP scheme that because there's no consequences to the police for fudging it in a police report, and we've caught them in lies many, many times. But this week, huge. But no consequences for them, no trouble. They're never going to be called aside by a prosecutor. They're not going to be reprimanded for it. The rule of law falls apart. In the States, it's the big rule of law falling apart. In our situation in BC, we've seen the quality of policing drop every year since the IRP scheme came out, the rule of law falling apart. Here is where you can see the damage that can be caused and how bad it can be when police officers think they can get away with just breaking the law.
Yeah. I mean, it would be nice if they put more monitoring in place. Like I know from, trying to get this information in criminal trials, they don't keep a record of who looks something up and when. So you kind of have to catch them in the act.
Well, they do, but it's like a deep search. You've got to basically go back to the company that provides the software, and they've got to go in and look at it to be able to see who was in there.
Yeah, but heck, on half the computer applications we use in the course of our work as lawyers, it will show you when you logged in and
when everybody else logged in and
Yeah.
what they downloaded and things like that.
Yeah,
It's kind of surprising that it's not just there.
Why is that not just there? And why is that not disclosed too in criminal cases? When somebody ran a license check and things like that.
Yeah. Today I had one where the police officer said that he got information that wasn't true. That the police officer was not truthful about the information he got from it. He had done some math and his math was off, and that's where I could see it. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to have disclosure of that, to be able to lay it out?
Yep. Anyway, this is going to be an unfolding story for a while. We'll continue to monitor it on the podcast.
Well, I feel like we dropped the ball on the tow truck thing, and I suspect these are tied in to some extent.
They in fact have said that in the press conferences, that there are links to the notorious tow truck industry, but they're not saying how much. It's still under investigation. They probably know more than they're letting on. But there was a shooting that was connected to this whole investigation, and the shooting occurred at a commercial complex, which had some affiliation to somebody in the tow truck industry. There was a tow truck scene in the video of the shooting. And there's also some links that are being discovered between the tow truck people and gun violence and organized crime.
So I think of I was thinking this is crazy Ontario. And then I started thinking about the extortion cases that we're having in BC. So you can't say that it's isolated to Ontario. One of the things that's also struck me and reminded me this week in this case that is on both Kyla's and my minds, you get video and you see that a police officer is dishonest about something, and then really dishonest about something. And then you see that there's 5 other officers standing around. So often we see officers standing around and there can be no reason. Sometimes I see them standing around and then somebody will show up with 2 trays of Starbucks coffee. And this is a fairly common thing. But seeing the other officers standing around and nobody stepping in and nobody going and saying, wow, this officer did everything wrong. Nobody, because they don't want to embarrass the officer, or they don't want to embarrass themselves. Nobody actually correcting the officer who's doing everything right when there's 5 officers standing around and at least 1 or 2 who do know what they're supposed to do, because we know who those officers are. Tells you that this culture continues to exist. And the culture that allowed those officers to go beat those people up in Stanley Park for years and years and years. That was 25 years ago, roughly now. That was at the beginning of my career. Again, the officer who was the whistleblower was the one who suffered out of that circumstance. It doesn't feel like it's really changed. it feels like in many respects it's got worse. And you're thinking to yourself, what was it like 50 years before? We always think, oh, it was terrible 50 years before. And 50 years before, it must have been awful 50 years before. But no, it's actually the culture it can be so bad. And it's not just an issue of a couple bad apples. There can be some really bad people in there who make it awful for everybody. But there's the cone of silence, and there's the needing to get along, and a bunch of other features or factors that work into how people's brains handle these things.
Well, it's also
And all of these people, almost all of them, I will tell you, go into policing fully as ethical, thoughtful, decent people who want to do the right thing, and something changes.
it's also, there's this indoctrination of this idea that, you're on the good side and everybody else is on the bad side, of like us versus them mentality that we see as defense lawyers from officers who often think like we are bad people because we perform a function within our criminal justice system. They don't understand, like, it's just all a bunch of rules and we're all just playing in a big sandbox that somebody made up.
That's disclosed by the thin blue line attitude.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that also contributes to it, right? You don't want to betray an officer, even if they're doing bad things, because at the end of the day, they're the good guys, like superheroes, right? All the superheroes commit crimes, but we all think they're great because they're stopping the bad guy.
Yeah. And despite all of that, they perpetually persuading themselves. Many of them will say how horrible they've seen, the horrible things they see. And many of them will disclose to us, that doesn't surprise me. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But you're persuading yourself that, you're the superheroes and therefore it's justified.
Yeah.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. When the Twin Towers were destroyed, we suddenly created this whole idea of the first responders. If it had been there before, it suddenly became a huge thing. And then we started elevating these people to be beyond criticism. And we had, until George Floyd, and unfortunately it took an American thing, U.S. police became beyond criticism from 2001 to George Floyd. And it was the same thing here. Of course, we always get our Canadian version of what's going on in the States, and the same thing. And really, like, our societal attitude has set us up for what's happened in Toronto, because we are not questioning the police enough. And the police hate being questioned. These lawyers don't want to be questioned either. Nobody wants to be questioned in the course of their thing. But you've chosen a career where you were going to be subject to significant scrutiny. And sometimes that scrutiny is going to be awful. And there's going to be times that you do the right thing. Absolutely. And yet you will never be able to persuade somebody else that you did the right thing.
Mhm.
But you did the right thing. And I'm sorry, it hurts when that happens. It does hurt. I know it. But like, that's, you made that deal with the devil when you decided to become a police officer or a lawyer.
To close out on this discussion, I want to say, you brought back this 9/11 comparison and how, our sort of willingness to tolerate charter violations and our willingness to tolerate the conduct of the police when it crosses the line because they are, the good guys who save lives and the first responders. I wonder, not right now, but maybe 5 or 10 years from now, after all of this is over, hopefully sooner than that, what has happened with the Trump administration, the lack of respect for the rule of law, what's going on with ICE, whether that will see a pendulum swing back to being more cautious about police overreach.
Yeah, I mean, Trump will not live for forever.
Nobody will.
But I have no,
He could sign an executive order that he does.
I have no optimism that sanity will return to the U.S. I think there may be enough Stephen Miller types that they manage to maintain control, and that could live out my lifetime. So, I mean, things change. Things always change. But I thought the institutions, the resilience of the institutions were the one thing that could potentially protect us. And the courts tried in the first Trump administration, and things started to look like lawyers were going to be the ones who saved us then. And of course, Trump was much emboldened, no longer had sane people around him when the second term came. Trump is no longer held back by anything. And we see that the institutions aren't substantive.
Yeah. Okay. So I have no smooth transition into our next topic. So our next topic is cell phones.
Okay.
Cell phones enforcement.
And it's new to me.
Yeah, so the Court of Appeal yesterday released a decision in the case of Akin Bobola, which I think we've talked about on the podcast before. It was a guy who was using his cell phone, been self-represented the whole time, which, may be part of the problem. Using his cell phone, he had it in a mount. It fell off the mount. He bent down to pick it up. The police officer saw him holding the phone and gave him the ticket. He fights the ticket in traffic court. The matter comes on before Judicial Justice Les Brantz, who listens to his evidence, lets him, tell his story, does the whole trial properly, and then says in his reasons, "Therefore, sir, you admitted to picking up the cell phone after it slid on the floor, and I find as a finding of fact that you were holding it in your hand. Therefore, that constitutes use pursuant to the Motor Vehicle Act, and I have no hesitation in coming to the conclusion that you are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of this offense, and therefore I found you guilty of the offense as charged." So he says that he should not have been found guilty. He says in his appeal that goes all the way to the Court of Appeal that holding it alone isn't enough.
Okay.
Which the Court of Appeal has no trouble saying, no, we've already said multiple times, holding the phone in a position in which it can be used is use, as defined in the Motor Vehicle Act. It's explicit.
Leaving it sitting on your leg.
Yep.
Pinning it under your leg.
Yep. They talked about the different interpretations of use, including having it, resting against a part of your body or something like that.
Holding it in a scarf wrapped up in your hand, as I've seen.
Yeah.
But I wonder about being in your shirt pocket.
That would not be use, I would say. I had a client, I'm not a client, I advised somebody as like de facto duty counsel one day who had it in their headscarf, and it was securely in their headscarf, and the judicial justice did acquit them. Anyway, the individual obviously lost his use argument, and then he said that his trial was unfair. It was procedurally unfair because the judicial justice didn't consider the defense of necessity.
Yeah, it's not going to work. So it's not necessary that you have your phone. You can pull over and pick up your phone.
Well, I mean, there might be a situation.
There could be if you were, I can imagine scenarios. We don't need to come up with them, but
we don't. But there was a case from the BC Supreme Court where somebody had argued that their phone falling down on the floor could have obstructed the brake, and therefore they needed to pick it up, and they were found guilty in that circumstance. But the Court of Appeal does say something that opens the door a crack for that argument. So they say at paragraph 32, the summary conviction appeal judge addressed the issue of necessity and found that such a defense must fail on the evidence at trial because there was no evidence of imminent peril or danger. The Chambers judge agreed that the applicant did not present any evidence that the phone on the floor posed an imminent peril or danger. Instead, he did not testify to that effect. In finding that leave was not warranted, the Chambers judge found that the applicant knew the position of the phone at the time of the trial and did not testify about it. While I would not foreclose the possibility of such a defense succeeding on a different record, I agree with the Chambers judge that given the paucity of evidence supporting a defense of necessity in this case, the ground of appeal has no prospect of success. So the Court of Appeal actually basically says, you give evidence that your phone is in such a position that there is imminent peril. Your defense of necessity may have an air of reality to it.
I think they're just saying that they're not shutting off the possibility of a necessity defense. They didn't want that to be.
But if you were to give evidence that your phone was directly under the brake,
Yeah, I mean, I'm maybe you could persuade the court of that your phone was directly under the brake and you had to pull it out. But it would be very difficult. I mean, you could imagine also a scenario where you're using your phone for an emergency purpose because you've got the emergency purpose exemption there. The emergency purpose has not been limited in any way, and there's no test from the court yet. So could be that as well. I suppose it could potentially short something out in your car. I don't know, but I think you'd have trouble. You'd have trouble establishing a necessity defense for having it in your hand. Bumping it out of the way and then pulling over, finding a spot, putting it back in your mount. I think that would probably be the expectation that would provide the defense. But if you think it's going to get down behind your pedal and you're reaching down underneath to pick it up, I don't think that's going to go very far unless you just drop it on the floor right then. And
Well, interestingly, Paul, one of the things that happened in the traffic court trial and one of the arguments on appeal here that the Court of Appeal considered was that his evidence was curtailed. And he was unsuccessful in that because the record showed that in the middle of his direct examination, he started a good argument, and the judicial justice said, well, hold on, you're not giving me your argument, you're giving me your evidence. So are there any other facts you want to give me? And he said, another thing that is not really relevant. And then the court asks him on 2 more occasions, any other evidence you want to give? And he says no. And then on both occasions, including right before he invited submissions. And then in submissions, he makes this comment about imminent peril that he argues, was a curtailing of his evidence because he didn't get to say that in his testimony, which in fact he did have every opportunity, the court says. But interestingly, there is some indication that he could have presented evidence about imminent peril. The Court of Appeals like, maybe. He had an opportunity to give evidence about imminent peril and indicated there was nothing more he wished to say. His subsequent submissions were not evidence.
Our courts' methods of dealing with self-represented individuals are so inconsistent across the board that I can never figure out what they're going to allow and what they're not going to allow. So they will allow a self-represented individual to testify about all sorts of things and to scream and yell and do all sorts of things. They'll let them do things that just shock me, what they will allow. And then they will disallow something else, like they will. So it is completely inconsistent, and not the Court of Appeal necessarily, but them too. It's part of our BC Supreme Court, provincial court. Like I am often just shocked at where they will stop somebody who is a self-represented, where they will help somebody and hand them everything, or when they will just accept everything from somebody who's like clearly like. From my perspective, I'm sitting there going, why are you allowing any of this? Where are you going to draw the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to individual judicial discretion.
Which is terrible, because we already give so much discretion. We give all this discretion for findings of fact that are a threat to the justice system. Then we've got this this discretion of allowing whatever evidence is going to come in and not go in, and then just say, I'm going to give it different weight. It was stricter when I started practicing, and it feels like it's that assumption that all judges are on their best at all times, every day, perfectly, reasonable and without any bias in their brain every day, perfectly, is just setting it up to fail.
Okay. Well, speaking of people...
But we could use AI to decide everything.
Speaking of people who set up to fail, let's talk about the ridiculous driver of the week.
I can see you're going back through your messages here to figure out who you planned on doing it.
Well, I had one idea, which, since we're a video podcast, I will show people.
Yeah.
It's a guy who crashed his car into a fire hydrant, and the fire hydrant lifted the car up into the...
I did like that one because all the airbags went off, and it was a fairly low-speed collision. He just bumped over the fire hydrant, and then the fire hydrant just lifted it up. This was in California somewhere.
Yeah, like I like that. That's
Yeah.
fun. That's lighthearted. But I think the one I really like is the one that I got sent by our colleague AK yesterday.
Tell me.
It was
Remind me.
it was a man, a mechanic, driving a customer's car down Highway 1 in an 80-kilometer-an-hour zone. He's speaking in Punjabi. This is all on dash cam, presumably the customer's dash cam. And he's speaking in Punjabi to a colleague of his who is driving another customer's car behind him. And they are going 140 kilometers an hour in an 80-kilometer-an-hour zone. And I had AK.
Mechanics driving customers' cars.
Yeah. And I had AK translate because he speaks Punjabi and I do not. He says, he is saying, follow me, tells the other driver to speed up, change lanes to the right lane, then yells out his speed, 133, 140, then says, slow down, I see cops ahead. And says, 2 Punjabis coming, who is going to stop us? Who was the BC Highway Patrol?
So minimum 7-day vehicle impound of a client's customer's
Yeah.
car.
The video continues. The guy's like, oh, I'm going to get fired. The officer has zero sympathy for him. He's like, well, what are you doing? You're driving this customer's car. It's not your car. You're on the clock.
Yeah.
And you're going 60 kilometers an hour over the speed limit. I'm sorry. What are you doing? What are you thinking?
That's pretty ridiculous. 3 ridiculous well, 1 car accident and then the 2 fellows in there.
Yeah.
Who probably both lost their jobs for that one. I would not be happy if my car was impounded for 7 days because my mechanic drove it at excessive speeds on the highway.
No, I'm already stressed when the car's at the mechanic just for how long it takes to do the repairs.
Yeah. As I was telling you yesterday when you were telling me this story, I, for years, wanted an E-Type Jag from age 13 to, 22. That was sort of, I thought, the one thing I would want in my life. I don't really want one so much anymore. But I used to think, how would I trust the mechanic not to wreck my E-Type Jag? I could never let them drive it. And then I thought, after that, when my obsession for those cars was gone, I thought, what a ridiculous thought process I had as a young man and child about this. I shouldn't worry about this. And here's the example.
Yeah.
That was the good reason. So I wasn't so ridiculous after all. I've rehabilitated myself in my own view.
I mean, we've had
My historic self.
We've had staff members who've gotten speeding tickets in our cars.
In your car, not
My
mine.
car, yeah, I know. My car likes to go fast.
There you go. Not mine.
All right, well, that's our podcast. If you maybe got your client's car impounded and now have an excessive speeding ticket to contend with, you give us a call at 604-685-8889 or find us online at vancouvercriminallaw.com and tune in next week for another exciting episode of Driving Law.